Context of white supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another program to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Always a pleasure. Our guest for the program, it is her 10th visit on the cows. Just always, we are super gracious that she could share a bit of her Sunday evening with us. Third generation physician, general and child psychiatrist, author of the ISIS Papers, The Keys to the Colors, had a profound impact on tons of black people, non-white people around the world and their understanding of white supremacy, Dr.Frances Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Mm-hmm.
Good to hear from you. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I hope you're also doing well.
Trying to be productive. Wanted to hop right to it. Wanted to get your thoughts. There have been so many different things happening, current events that are just saturated with white supremacy. I did want to get your thoughts. We had an earlier broadcast today with a white man who resides in the area of the world known as South Africa. And he's written this book where he basically talks about how black people are inferior to white people and more likely to be criminals, the whole nine, bell curve. And the cherry on top is that he brags about making his living selling brownies. We asked this gentleman what should be done with black people since he's concluded that they're inferior.
He makes his living selling
brownies, chocolate brownies.
I see. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And
yes, go ahead.
We asked him, what should be done with black people since you've concluded that black people are inferior and stupid and not as smart as white. What should be done with us? And he said he hadn't thought about that, and he didn't talk about that in his book. And after some pressing, he said maybe some schooling, not too much because they can't achieve very much anyway. Maybe that's what should be done, and maybe if we do that, that would curb their criminality. Sounded like William Shockley almost. I just was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I would like black people to understand so much about racism, white supremacy as a total system construct that when they hear statements of that kind, they will say, well, this again is just another instance, another evidence of the system of racism, white supremacy, as we understand it and as we talk about it. As you know, I have said that racism, white supremacy is a local, national, global behavioral system construct organized by people who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously. It consists of patterns of perception, logic, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, and symbol formation manifested in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet in which the overwhelming majority of people are black, brown, red, and yellow, labeled as non-white by white-skinned people. All of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people. So this is a system consciously and or subconsciously determined by people who classify themselves as white for their genetic survival. And because they are the ones who are genetic deficient in terms of skin coloration, or a genetic recessive trait, a mutation that they need to project, or they feel the necessity to project, that other people are genetically impaired. And they structure a system so that black, brown, red, and yellow people are systematically oppressed to be made to look inferior, so that people who classify themselves as white can look superior. In other words, if the whites structure a system so that economically black people are deprived, educationally black people are deprived, et cetera, then it looks as though black people are inferior and white people are superior. But this is a system construct that people who classify themselves as white maintain for their survival. So I would want black people to arrive at an understanding, or for us to have a critical mass of black people who take themselves seriously and take the phenomena that they see happening on planet Earth seriously, so that they do understand and articulate on an ongoing basis their understanding of what this is all about. And it's the same mindset. In other words, this South African gentleman, we'll call him a gentleman, articulated that he felt that black people were inferior. This is a constant, continuous message historically of the white supremacy, racism, white supremacy mindset. The gentleman in Norway, and also Norway, who just shot up large numbers of people and bombed a municipal building, the underlying thinking on his part, the anti-multiculturalism that has been spoken of in the newspaper, is really anti-non-white people being in Europe. And all the news reports have been bringing out the fact that this is an attitude prevalent in Norway, but also prevalent all across Europe. The what they call anti-Islamic, anti-Muslim attitude, those are euphemisms for saying anti-non-white people, anti-people coming into white, traditionally white areas who are genetically dominant, who can change the appearance of Europe. And so this is the same message. I maintain that what we see happening, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and what we see happening on Capitol Hill, and what is being discussed in terms of the budget and the size of the debt, that what it really is a manifestation of racism, white supremacy. The major undercurrent is that the so-called conservative or Republican Party has articulated from the beginning that they want to see this man fail, this black man, the first black president of the United States, that their ultimate goal objective was not to secure the country, or to secure the economic well-being on a global level. Their priority was to see this black man fail. And this is what we see happening. So we are at a critical period in time where there are many levels or many instances where racism, white supremacy is surfacing, so people cannot avoid talking about it, but they will try to avoid talking about it, calling it something else other than racism, white supremacy. We can even throw into the mix the case in New York City, where the Dominique Strauss-Kahn man who was to run for president of France has been accused of raping a black woman who was a hotel maid. She was from the African country of Guinea, and she was raped by this man, forcefully raped by him, according to her report. And so, there are a lot of people who try to accuse her on, it's like Sally Hemings trying to accuse Thomas Jefferson of raping her or sexually assaulting her, because many of the people who classify themselves as white want to say that she's made this story up, et cetera, et cetera. But racism, white supremacy is surfacing so that it has to be recognized, and we will do ourselves well, instead of running away from this reality to confront this reality and to say this is indeed what is happening on planet Earth. And people who classify themselves as white, as well as all of the non-white people on the planet, will help themselves to function more effectively if they indeed recognize it. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Again, Dr.Frances Cress Welsing. Wow. I guess if I could go back to the incident with Anders Breivik.
Can I ask you to speak louder? I'm having trouble hearing you.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. Anders Breivik, the white man who has been accused, or I guess he admitted to the acts, the bombing, the shooting in Norway. Some of the media coverage I have noted, they are not labeling this man as a terrorist. I've noted at the beginning of the coverage, they were saying this is Muslim terrorism, code word for non-white people. When it was found out, oh, a white person did this, immediately, nope, not a terrorist. And I even saw one news report where they declared the title of the report was, "This is not terrorism." They said this is just a crazy white man. I was curious, do you have any thoughts?
See, I believe this is evidence of people who have the racism, white supremacy mindset, whether they're conscious of it or not, denying that this kind of activity against people of color, because there were children who were of African and Asian heritage who were killed in this atrocity. And it was mentioned that many of the children were non-white in the New York Times, but we haven't heard that focused on at all in the news. Do you see? But this reluctance to say that this is a terrorist is an act of racism, white supremacy. In other words, the people who are talking about harming or injuring non-white people, they're not terrorists, but finding any excuse to label a person of color a terrorist, and this is what everybody should focus on. And we, again, should address that fact, because this is not a person who, I'm a psychiatrist, and I say this person in Norway is not mentally ill any more than all of the other people who classify themselves as white, who believe in and articulate and support in one way or another racism, white supremacy. But the excuse and the cover for this kind of activity by saying the person is mentally ill so that we can dismiss it. It's like someone saying that Adolf Hitler was mentally ill. No, Adolf Hitler is a person who classified himself as white, who was very smart, and who set up a plan. Now, he was not a just person, but he didn't pretend to be a just person. He was a white supremacist, and he said that he was going to cleanse Germany, Austria, and the rest of Europe to the extent that he could of people who were non-white. And he said the Semites of the Jewish religion, he was not interested in their religion, but they were not white, and that's why they were going to be killed. So he killed Semites of the Jewish religion. He killed black people who were in Germany. He killed gypsies. The definition of that term means out of Egypt. So to say that these people are crazy and dismiss it is a way of covering up and not wanting to talk about this dynamic, this critical dynamic on the planet of racism, white supremacy.
Mr. Neely Fuller Jr., I spoke to him about the Norway shooting and bombing, and he also pointed out the fact that he has not seen photographs of the 76 victims. He said that he's only seen images of some of the mourners and different people talking about and responding to the incidents, but he said he suspects, same thing that you did, that quite a few of these victims could be non-white people. And I think I saw 32 photographs of the 76 victims, and I saw at least one female who, in my opinion, undeniably a black female, and there were several other individuals that looked like they were most likely non-white people. Do you think that's a part of racism, white supremacy, to kind of obscure the
Yes, I do think that they would like to not show the faces if there were many non-white children. As I said, an article I saw in the New York Times, it might have been something like shortly after the event happened, and it said many of the children were of Asian and African heritage. And so why have we not seen these faces? And I think that the attempt is to cover over and to deny that there were non-white children who were killed, and to somehow dismiss this, and so that people don't really see clearly what is going on. But we must insist on seeing the pictures of the children. But even if they don't show the pictures of the children, it has come out in some of the news reports that these were non-white children, and the labor group that was running the camp is, more so-called liberal or left-wing, and they were being attacked in the headquarters. The government headquarters were being bombed because this was a group that was more supportive of racial diversity in Norway than the persons who were against racial diversity. And as I said, all over Europe at this time, from England to France to the Netherlands to the Scandinavian countries, there is a movement, just like the anti-immigration movement in this area of the world translate more non-white people coming into the area of the world that is called the United States of America. That movement is going on across Europe and across certainly the United States. And I say it absolutely must be understood for what it is. And it's important. This is not people of color, black people, brown people, red, yellow people should not be talking about hating white people. That's a waste of energy and a waste of time. What we should be doing is clarifying that we do, in fact, understand exactly what is going on and why it's going on, that this is racism, white supremacy, and this is considered necessary behavior for the purpose of white genetic survival on the planet. Again, we have to go back to the fact that fewer than 1/10 of the people on this planet have white skin. 9/10 of the people on the planet are black, brown, red, and yellow people. And if you were to mix, if there was mixture, if people were not paying any attention whatsoever to skin color and people were just relating on the planet, the genetic recessive state of skin whiteness would disappear. And then you would have a planet of colored people. And this is what people who classify themselves as white consider their annihilation. And the Norwegian terrorist has, in so many words, said this, that if all of these colored people are allowed to come in, it will change the identity of the Norwegian people. And this is the same thing that is being said in France. It'll change the identity of Europe, meaning it will change the skin coloration of the people who classify themselves as European, because white skin, as I said earlier, is a genetic recessive trait, and the ability to produce the black pigment melanin that allows skin to be black, brown, red, and yellow is a genetically dominant trait. And so just like President Obama is the evidence of white genetic annihilation, because the mother was white, the father was a black man from Kenya. A genetic recessive trait, white skin, plus a genetically dominant trait, black skin. And so the end product would have to be, the end product could not be white. And so that's the evidence of white genetic annihilation that I maintain underlies all of this behavior, which is why early on in the 19th century or following the emancipation of African slaves here in the United States, when there was emancipation and then the practice of lynching and castrating black men became the call of the day. And the accusation that a black man looked at a white woman, thought about looking at a white woman, even coming up to the 20th century when 14-year-old Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi is supposed to have said something to a white female store owner, and this 14-year-old Chicago young man was killed, mutilated and killed in Mississippi. So we must be able to understand and see how all of this is tied together. I say that President Barack Obama is being subjected to a political assassination or a political, what shall we call it, a political lynching, because the Republicans are saying we are not going to respect this black man. We are not going to listen to anything that he has to say. And it's quite clear, and I think that we should not ignore it as black people. On the contrary, I'm suggesting that black people take the position, wait a minute, if this disrespect of this black man, the first black man to be president of the United States, if this pattern of disrespect does not stop immediately, and I mean yesterday, then black people are going to black out Thanksgiving and black out Christmas. And if anything, black people are going to take the money that they would spend in a store and somehow see that that money gets to Somalia or to the countries in Africa where the people are dying of starvation. But not spend any money buying white turkeys and gifts at Christmas if this disrespect, because it's not just the disrespect of President Barack Obama. That disrespect is being directed at all of us as black people, and we need to understand
it. Again, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, you want to talk about disrespect and degrading black people. Last time that you were with us, it was the report that black females are less attractive. I think that came out in the spring of this year. This time around, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, he is accused of raping this black female in the hotel in New York. I've been watching the news on France 24, and the white people there have been a lot less refined in their commentary. They were giving out her full name from the very beginning, no anonymity at all, and white people in France admitted that that is a huge deviation from their normal procedure with regards to rape victims. But I'm paraphrasing just to put it bluntly, but the attitude was pretty much, we are so horrified that you would handcuff Dominic Strauss-Kahn and treat him like some sort of criminal for being accused of raping this negress, who's an African immigrant at that. That's pretty much been the attitude, that they've reported that she's a prostitute, that she lied about being raped before, that this is a total farce, and we can't even believe that you would subject this man to this sort of scrutiny. It reminded me, Mr. Fuller, he said that under white supremacy, it is impossible for a white man to rape a black female, and he gave the logic. Do you have any more thoughts on that case?
Well, again, just imagine during the days of formal enslavement, if white men were handcuffed and put in prison, for sexually abusing African women. I mean, that was hundreds of years standard operating procedure. You can do anything that you want to do to black people. Any white man could rape or do anything to a black female person. Not to mention what was being done to black male persons, but this is done routinely. I'm just wondering, I don't know, maybe someone has evidence to the contrary, but it would be interesting to know how many white males have ever been arrested and charged with raping black females to this day. So, again, understanding that the power construct of racism, white supremacy, is white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. And so instead, see, it's like we're told that we're in a system of democracy, and so, well, this is not supposed to happen. But it happens all the time, and this should give us pause and cause us to think, well, maybe the system is not democracy with imperfection. The system is a perfected system of racism, white supremacy, which I maintain this is what it is, and it should be called for what it is.
Speaking of just the frequency with which these sorts of incidents happen, also current events. Did you see what happened with the shooting of Kenneth Harding Jr., the 19-year-old black male? He was shot and killed. Or actually, they're saying now that he shot himself while in a gun battle with enforcement officers in San Francisco, California. This happened just a couple weeks ago.
No, I didn't hear about that. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, he was shot and killed because he didn't have bus fare, $2 bus fare. And they have since shooting him, and they have him on camera where they left him out in the street to bleed to death after he had been shot repeatedly and no medical attention. Same area, Bay Area, California, Oscar Grant, he was shot and killed January 1st, 2009. The former officer who shot and killed him got less than 2 years or served less than 2 years time. We just had white people who work with the Oakland Fire Department. They have a pending suit against the fire department where they allege that the paramedics that treated Oscar Grant for those gunshot wounds did not treat his wounds correctly, and they allege that this was done intentionally. And they also allege that there are audio recordings of the paramedics in Oakland using racial slurs to talk about Oscar Grant and talking about the white man who shot and killed him while his trial was going on, saying that, they were in support of their brother. And I just thought that was, again, evidence of the total system. Do you have any thoughts on those incidents?
See, again, I think that the most important thing that black people can do at this juncture, of course we are upset when these unjust events happen, but instead of just blowing off and getting angry, we should be solidified in our understanding that we are dealing with a system of racism, white supremacy, which is a system for white genetic survival, and that the attack of racism, white supremacy is on black people in general and on black men in particular, which is why you have a driving while black, walking while black, trying to get on the bus while black or whatever, because it is black males who are perceived as the potential threat to white genetic annihilation. See, women are not looked upon as the same level of threat because women cannot impose sexual intercourse, whether they're white, black, brown, red, or yellow. It's just physiologically impossible for a woman to get a weapon to force a man to have sexual relations, because if she frightens him, he won't be able to maintain an erection. But on the contrary, males are so made that they can impose sexual intercourse. And so this is when the mindset or the brain computer, conscious and or subconscious, in the mind of the white male when he confronts a black male is that he has a weapon that can annihilate me. This is going on subconsciously because the white male is looking at the black male and aware of the black male's genetic dominance. And so the black male can make white disappear. White cannot make black disappear, speaking at the level of genetics. But the gun was developed as you have a weapon that can annihilate me. You have a genetic power to annihilate me. I have to create a weapon that can do same thing or that can destroy you. So the gun, just like for the police officers that you were speaking about in San Francisco, the gun is the weapon of choice when the white mindset is addressing its sense of vulnerability compared to non-white people. And so it was used in Norway, and it is used in this area of the world and other areas of the world where this is an issue. And in my first paper, The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism, where I said that the problem that people who classify themselves as white face is that they are not the majority on the planet. They are a tiny minority, and they are genetic recessive. And I said the challenge to white behavioral scientists is to help white people become comfortable with their minority status and with their genetic recessive or their genetic vulnerability. In other words, if this is talked about, if people who classify themselves as white, if this area of discussion is opened up, now you can have people operating at a subconscious level, partially conscious but also subconscious. And you raise that which is subconscious to consciousness so that white people are being, I won't say forced, but they are being caused to think about why they do what they do on the planet. That this, to me, would be the challenge to white behavioral scientists to help white people. Certainly black behavioral scientists cannot force white people to think about this critical issue that is underlying, I would say, 99.9% of their behavior. But it would be wonderful if people who classify themselves as white could be caused or helped to think about why they behave as they do. I mean, in psychiatry, before psychiatry became dominated by just giving medication, when psychiatry really was focusing on helping people understand their behavior so that they have a higher level of conscious control over their behavior, giving them insight, helping people develop insight, and therefore based on the insight, based on the knowledge and understanding of those forces and factors that are motivating their behavior, helping them to understand at that level. I mean, we have people who are calling themselves anti-racist, white people who call themselves anti-racist, but they don't talk about racism, white supremacy at the level that I'm talking about. Is that not your experience?
All the time. Yes, they do not give definitions, they do a lot to not be as clear as you are in your presentation, and they do not give a why. That's also a huge one. They do not give an explanation as to why white people do what they do to non-white people worldwide.
You see, but they are aware of my explanation. Is that not correct?
Many of the white people that I have talked to, they are aware of your work. Yes, ma'am.
You see, but they don't want to. In other words, if what I'm saying was accepted, this would really cripple the functioning of the system of racism, white supremacy. Because it's, in other words, if someone says, if a person who classifies him or herself as white, if they say, I don't really want to be racist, I want to be against racism, I want racism to come to an end. If they were sincere, then they would say, oh, this is interesting. Dr. Welsing has the most comprehensive statement about racism, white supremacy. Let's talk about that. But that doesn't happen. And one of the key anti-racists, I will not name him, says what Dr. Welsing talks about is pseudoscientific bullshit. Do you see? So as to dismiss. And that really is just so as to pretend that we don't like racism, to pretend to non-white people that we want to do something about this system. But really we do not. We want racism, white supremacy to continue so that there will be white genetic survival. This is my interpretation.
Third-generation physician, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, her 10th visit to the context of white supremacy. I'm in total agreement. I see no evidence, and really all of the white people that I have asked, they are in agreement. They see no evidence that white people are going to voluntarily discontinue practicing white supremacy. In fact, I believe Mr. Breivik, the white man who committed the acts in Norway, I feel like he is a great illustration. This is the religion of white supremacy. Their dedication to maintaining domination over non-white people and abusing non-white people. This is religion for white people. I just wanted to get your thoughts, if that makes sense.
Well, as in my definition, and that's certainly based on the work of Neely Fuller, that the system of racism, white supremacy is a system construct of behavior that covers economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. So white supremacy covers all of the areas of activity and the reasoning and thinking in all of those areas of activity simultaneously, whether consciously and or subconsciously determined. So, of course, this is guiding the behavior of the person in Norway who carried out the terroristic bombings and shootings, and I believe killing 76 people. 76 people. And this man's activity is about to disappear from the news. But I encourage people to think back how long and every day and how many times a day the killing of 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony, the 2-year-old who was killed in Florida by the mother, that was constantly and continuously in the news, every detail, every new tidbit of information, constantly being given out in the news, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And now we have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned, educated person whose father was a diplomat, a Norwegian diplomat. He killed 76 persons within a week and a half. That's almost out of the news. So this is just the evidence that we are dealing with a system of racism, white supremacy. And I challenge people who classify themselves as white, if they want to demonstrate that they indeed want racism, white supremacy to disappear from the planet and be replaced with justice, that they keep focusing on this, and they keep focusing on, well, let's stop using the term multiculturalism. Let's stop using the terms diversity. Let's use clear language. Let's talk about Racism, white supremacy. This Norway shooter was a supporter of racism, white supremacy. Adolf Hitler was a supporter of racism, white supremacy. People who call themselves Nazis, neo-Nazis, Ku Klux Klan person are supporters of racism, white supremacy. Let's not call it names where we don't really have to think about what it really is. Let's start referring to it as hate crimes. Hate is an emotion. What is the thinking and the reasoning and the logic behind a so-called emotion of hate? And that is racism, white supremacy, the behavioral system for white genetic survival and preventing white genetic annihilation on planet Earth. So the challenge is to, it's like sometimes people who classify themselves as white will say, Dr. Welsing, how can I help? And I say, tell black people what white people talk about when there are no black people around. And for every person that I've said that to, they go silent. And as an American University professor once said to me, white female professor, said, Dr. Welsing, I hate to admit it, but on all social occasions, when people who classify themselves as white are together and there are no black people around, she said, we are talking negatively about black people. And I told her that I understood that they are just talking code, talking necessary code for maintaining the system of racism, white supremacy, which has to be negative verbalizations about black people, just like the South African person that you talked about in the beginning of the interview. See, it's necessary to keep talking about they are genetically inferior, they are violent, they are this, they are that, they are the other thing, as though people who classify themselves as white are not doing certain specific things that push black people into doing the things that they might be doing at any point in time. But I say that black people now that we have understood, we have decoded, if you will, we have analyzed, and we understand exactly and specifically what this behavior power system is, and we understand as black people and other people of color that people who classify themselves as white, if after they circumnavigated the globe, beginning with Columbus in the 15th century, and they realized that everybody on the planet was black, brown, red, and yellow, and if the white males had sexual relations with the black females or the non-white females, all the children ended up being colored children looking like the mother. They understood, well, wait a minute, what if the men in the southern hemisphere began to move north and had sexual relations with the white women, that white would disappear. And from that point, they decided, well, wait a minute, we have to dominate all these people of color on the planet so that we, as a genetic recessive group of people, minority, tiny minority, will survive as white. So they set up a system for their survival. Well, the brain computer that is programmed for white genetic survival cannot simultaneously program the maximal development of the black genetic and constitutional potential. I mean, if you're afraid of white genetic annihilation, you will not promote the maximal development of the very people that you are fearful that can cause you genetic annihilation. What you do with them is, if you don't outright kill them, as the cases that you've mentioned, or any case of what we would call police brutality or so-called justifiable homicide, what you will do is lock millions of these men up, incarcerate them for long periods of time during their sexually reproductive years so that they cannot procreate and in effect put them in a situation of genocide, because when you begin to interfere with the reproductivity of any group of people, that's genocide. And we are on a genocide slide as black people in this area of the world.
There's an admitted racist who was a guest on the program not too long ago. She wrote a book, Silent Racism, and one of the interesting points that she makes is that she thinks one of the big reasons why we have not replaced white supremacy with justice is believing that there are some white people who are not racist. And this is directly from her book, page 82. She says, the existence of the not racist category produces in the minds of some white and non-white people the illusion that there are white people who bear no responsibility for the system of racism or for racial inequality. Yet, racism cannot be isolated from the racist practice and everyday racism of white people who produce indirect institutional racism daily, regardless of their recognition of it or their intention to do so. In this way, the illusion that most white people are not racist virtually ensures the perpetuation of institutional racism. Although this refined racism, by definition, is not spoken aloud, it would be a mistake to assume that it is of little importance or that the behavior following from it is not racist. Passivity by white people is also important in maintaining the process of racism. It only colludes with racism, allowing it to operate without interruption, but also encourages it. I thought that was pretty interesting. I rarely hear people say that a part of this problem is thinking that there are white people who are not racist. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Welsing?
Well, I don't know whether she, in all of that verbiage, is saying that because there are people of color who let white people off the hook or don't want to believe that all people are racist and hold them responsible, as opposed to saying people who classify themselves as white, consciously and or subconsciously, are the people who have power on this planet. And if they chose to stop practicing racism, they could stop practicing racism tomorrow morning, if that's what they chose to do. Yeah, do you see what I'm saying? As opposed to, yes, if non-white people, for example, on a job, in a job situation where people who classify themselves as white, as usual, are in charge of the job situation. And if a black person brings up, well, I'm being discriminated against based on race, in other words, I haven't been promoted and I have a salary that's less than a white person for doing the same job, that person is mistreated by people who classify themselves as white. So black people not bringing up racism, white supremacy, or wanting to believe that there are some people who don't practice it who may have white skin. Black people, for the most part, are afraid to bring it up because there are horrendous repercussions for black people who bring up the issue of racism, white supremacy. So I would want her to say that, you see, but the denial of racism on the part of people who classify themselves as white as well as the victims does help to maintain racism, white supremacy, but the denial on the part of people who classify themselves as white is because they want to deny it, whereas when non-white people deny it, it's like people on a plantation, the slaves on a plantation, learn in a very short period of time what they can do and what they cannot do to try to stay out of trouble with the slave master. So the denial is for different reasons on the part of white and non-white people. That's my position.
I appreciate that point. Wow, I wanted to ask, I spoke with you a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about Neely Fuller Jr., his 4 stages of white supremacy: establishment, maintenance, expansion, refinement. And you were saying that it is a cycle that repeats, and I had never heard that before. Could you share some of that with our listeners?
Yes. I think that a critical word is reconstruction. I mean, that's the word that has been used by historians and maybe misused. In other words, I look at starting with the emancipation of black people from formal enslavement. And slavery was a phase of the system of racism, white supremacy, enslavement of African people. So then the slaves were emancipated, and the slaves thought, well, the shackles are off, and now we're free, and we are going to be able to do whatever we need to do to maximally develop ourselves. And what the African people, emancipated African people, were then faced with was a whole system of laws that were called Jim Crow laws. We can call them white supremacy laws, were set up and put in place to block black people from really being able to move forward. And many black people, many black men were really put, could be captured and put on plantations to work, even though emancipation had come to an end. And so I said that was like the reconstruction of white supremacy. The reconstruction of white supremacy. Also, at the end of enslavement, there were black people in the South who became senators, and they had different positions in the government. And so then the laws were constructed, and those black people were knocked out of those so-called power political positions. So the next thing that happened was the civil rights era, where black people moved en masse, Dr. Martin Luther King and others moved en masse to change the laws. And the laws were changed. But then the system of racism, white supremacy said, wait a minute, these black people are talking about black pride, black dignity, black power, black is beautiful. We cannot have them respecting themselves. If they really continue this respecting themselves, then we're going to have a difficult time maintaining the power equation of white over non-white. So we have to dismantle this black respect. And I maintain they did it psychologically through so-called music and entertainment. And whereas you had a group, hip-hop group like Public Enemy, come out with an important album, Fear of the Black Planet, which they had based on my paper, The Cress Theory of Color Confrontation and Racism. They had put a political message on the rap. I maintain that the system of racism said, wait a minute, we cannot have black people made politically aware through the music that they listen to. So what we have to do is take charge of these musicians and pay them to put a trashy message, a message of trash and degradation of black people. Now, we're going to pay them millions of dollars so they will look important And we will even have them giving monetary contributions to the Urban League and the NAACP, and maybe even to politicians. But we will have them peddling trash, the psychological destruction. Now, they are not politically sophisticated, so they won't understand why we are having them do this, but they'll be glad to get the money. And so we will have them purvey this trash. And so you end up with black people calling themselves niggers, gangsters, thugs, dogs, bow wows, bitches, and hoes. So we became the only people on planet Earth that were willing to demean and degrade ourselves. Do you see? But again, that was what? That was a second Reconstruction following the Civil Rights Movement, when black people were moving in a positive direction about themselves. So then the next phase is a black man runs for president of the United States of America. Well, even though there was white support for his presidency, when he got into the White House and you have a black man with his black wife and his black children and his black mother-in-law in the White House, even the people who classify themselves as white, who called themselves liberals, began to think, oh my God, what have we done? Because just the image of the black man being in the White House and being in charge began to set off the anxiety of, if we lose power, if the power equation changes, and this in the parlance, in the symbolic parlance of white supremacy speech, you don't want to be caught behind the 8-ball. Because if you're caught, that's language coming out of the game of billiards or pool. And all of these games are symbolically about racism, white supremacy, but in most instances not understood as such. But President Obama being in the White House makes the white mindset that is concerned subconsciously about white genetic survival begin to feel, wait a minute, we're being caught behind the 8-ball, and that translates into white genetic annihilation. So then we have this massive attack. We can call this the third Reconstruction, meaning the reconstruction of racism, white supremacy. In other words, if the system moves from establishment, maintenance, expansion, refinement. Refinement is the emancipation of the slaves. Then emancipation is, refinement is changing the laws so it looks like equality. But each time you have that kind of gain, it has to be thrown back, because the fundamental concern is white genetic survival by any means necessary. So you have a black man becomes president. He's intelligent, articulate, brilliant, every single qualification that is needed to lead the nation, to lead the world. But then it hits subconsciously that this means white genetic annihilation, or symbolically, just because a black man is supposed to be in charge. And so we have to have the third Reconstruction, and that is the annihilation of his power and showing him all this talk about, the budget and the debt and all of this, but the articulation that came out once he was elected, where you had spokespersons on the television saying, our goal objective is to make him fail and to see that he fails. And so now we have what I call the third Reconstruction of racism, white supremacy. And it's going on all across the world, so to speak, as I said early on, all across Europe. People who classify themselves as white are fighting against the tide of non-white people just moving into white areas, which makes them start thinking we're losing control and white genetic annihilation is imminent. And it's happening in this country, in this area of the world, simultaneously. And so, again, this is not for people, people of color should not, well, we're going to hate white people. That's not the way you win a chess game. You don't win tennis hating your opponent. You don't win checkers hating your opponent. You have to understand the game that is on the table. And the game that is clearly on the table, local, nationally, globally, is racism, white supremacy, the struggle for white genetic survival on planet Earth by any means necessary. And we need to understand this, and we need to address it. And those black people who want to help, those people who classify themselves as white want to help, then they have to step out of the denial of racism. Don't come and talk, white people, don't come and talk to black people about how wonderful you are and how many non-white children you are adopting to make you not look like you're racist. No, what you need to do is to talk about, yes, we are engaged in the practice of racism, white supremacy, whether we call ourselves conservative or liberal or independent or green. Our fundamental concern is we belong to the white genetic survival political party. We have extreme in that, people who go around shooting and killing black people, sneaking around in the dark or in the open, killing black people. And then we have people who pretend to be the friends of black people, but they don't want to talk about racism, white supremacy. So you have a complete total spectrum, but the answer is for people who classify themselves as white, who genuinely want to see justice on the planet, they will come out and talk about racism, white supremacy for what it really is. And instead of people yelling the minute a black person talks about racism, white supremacy, for the persons who classify themselves as white yelling, you're playing the race card. Well, listen, the whole deck is racism, white supremacy. And it's not a question of a non-white person playing the race card. It's people who classify themselves as white. See, that's very important. People who classify themselves as white. You classify yourself as white because this is where the power system structure that has been organized by people who classify themselves as white for white genetic survival on the planet. And this is what needs to be, no matter how difficult it is, it's difficult for black people to have the courage to focus and face it and not, shuffling their feet and scratching their heads. I mean, no black person that is teaching in any university, and certainly not the Ivy League universities, can talk about the system of racism, white supremacy, and maintain their job and maintain their tenure. They're not allowed. They can use the word race from time to time. They can have institutes about race and justice. But they cannot talk about, they are not allowed to talk about racism, white supremacy. You can't be consistently on a television show and talk about system of racism, white supremacy, and have the advertisers continue to support those television shows. So this is the dilemma, and I like people to think about the parallel of Nazi Germany, where Adolf Hitler said, the people of the Jewish religion are not white people, and I'm going to kill them. And the Semites of the Jewish religion wanted to be accepted as Germans, as Europeans, and they didn't want to focus on the fact of what Adolf Hitler was saying, that he was going to destroy them because they were not white. They wanted to believe that this was a crazy person who really didn't mean what he was saying. And so a great tragedy happened. And so this is something that I maintain that people need to think about. And Sigmund Freud was a Semite of the Jewish religion, and he could not talk about white supremacy, racism, white supremacy, which anti-Semitism is a form of racism, white supremacy. And people talk about Muslims all over. Muslims are Semites. People of the Islamic religion, those are Semites. That means mixed race. It's a term like mulatto, mixed race. And so when people are busy talking about Islam and immigration, they really are saying non-white people. We don't want non-white people all over Europe because it will spell our genetic annihilation. But I say pay attention to what happened to the Semites of the Jewish religion in the Second World War under Adolf Hitler, because the same dynamic. Hitler died, but the dynamic is going forward. The dynamic is going on all over the Western world, including this area of the world that we call the United States of America. And we would be wise if it is addressed. I'm the only psychiatrist in the United States of America who has been talking about racism and white supremacy for the last 41 years. I'm the only psychiatrist in the world. And this is a tragedy, but I'm the only psychiatrist in the world who has been talking about racism and white supremacy for the last 41 years. And you know what is interesting? 2 years ago, I was invited to come to Norway, to come to Oslo, Norway,
Wow.
and to talk about racism. And somehow I was uncomfortable about going. And it was, I was concerned about the flights because there was, problems with scheduling flights. And I didn't want to have to deal with that difficulty, but maybe it was a good thing I never got there.
Wow. Do you remember who invited you or who wanted you to come?
It was a group of non-white people, people who were dealing with racism in Norway.
Wow. I know we have listeners, and we have had guests who are in Sweden, and we've had one listener, he's in Denmark, who they say consistently, racism, white supremacy, it is here. So, global system.
Absolutely, it's here. I mean, this mistreatment of President Barack Obama is the face of racism, white supremacy. And I'll say it here, that John Boehner, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, he is a Republican, and he is being disrespected. Now, you know what is being said about him and has been said about him throughout his political career is that his skin is dark. They keep talking about his skin is dark and how much he cries when he gets up to speak. Now, he says that he's from Ohio. He says that there are 11 children in his family. 4 of the 11 took their color from their mother. Well, Ohio is one of the states where the products of white slave masters and black women, the mixed-race people, many of them went into Ohio to live, either prior to the Civil War or after the Civil War. So there were a lot of mixed-race people. There are people in Ohio who are the exact same color of John Boehner, who call themselves black. You see, so when push comes to shove, see, we're at a period of push comes to shove. We got a black president who has stimulated increase in the number of extreme right-wing groups all across the country. And so to the extent that this white survival dynamic is stirred up consciously, subconsciously, so then you end up with a Speaker of the House who says he's white, but his skin is dark enough for people to always ask, do you have a tan? No, he doesn't have a tan. This is his color. And so when he stands up, do they think, wait a minute, he has color, so we don't respect him either? We don't respect the president who is clearly identifies himself as black. But do we also disrespect the speaker who's Republican? And so his party members are moving away from him and disrespecting him. So I say, whether we like it or not, certainly I didn't order these events to take place, but here they are, they're taking place. And some of the ancient societies would say when you have a confluence of events, you see, like you have many major things reflecting the same dynamic, it's important to pay attention. And so we have what is happening in Norway, what is happening all across Europe, what is happening in the United States and the disrespect of the black president of the United States, massive disrespect of this black man. The rape by the man who was supposed to be the next president of France, raping a black woman in an expensive hotel in New York City. You see, we have all of these events taking place that are a sign that, you know, the older people used to say, show me a sign, meaning show me an indication in the subtle activity that is taking place in an environment about what is the meaning of something important that is happening. And so we should all, regardless as to how we classify ourselves, I maintain, if we want to see the planet go forward in a constructive direction, whether we like it or not, whether we are uncomfortable facing the truth of racism, white supremacy, we need to confront it and face it and talk about it in clear language, not the play language of multiculturalism, hate. In the language of racism, white supremacy, give a definition, a specific definition of what it is that we are talking about.
Context of white supremacy, our guest, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. If it's all right with you, we have some folks that dialed in, and I'm sure they have questions as well. If we can go to the phone lines, if that's okay with you, Dr. Welsing.
Oh, that's fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Justice, if you have questions for Dr. Welsing, your line should be open.
Well, first of all, can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Okay. Greetings, Dr. Welsing. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Do one at a time, if you please.
Okay. Well, first of all, I found a video on CNN.com, and the video is relatives charged in murder of 10-year-old found locked in box. I thought that was an interesting video. Do you mind if we play it? And I would like to ask a question about it.
Would you repeat the question for me, please? You know, the host, would you repeat it?
She said that she found a video, and she would like to play the clip. It's a minute or so. She would like to play it and ask you a question about this video. It's a recent current event news item.
Oh, that's up to you.
I think
Oh, go ahead, Gus.
I was just going to say I have it right here. She mailed it to me, and yeah, it's like a minute or so. I can play it if that's all right with you, Dr. Welsing.
Excuse me?
I said I can, if it's all right with you, I can go ahead and
Somehow
play
I'm
it, Dr.
having
Welsing.
trouble hearing. Can you? I don't know if it's closer to the mic or what.
Okay. Let's see. Am I being heard? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, but if you can speak louder, it would be helpful.
Okay. She has about a 1-minute video that I guess it's a current event that she would like to play and just get your feedback on, if that's all right.
It's all right, but it's the only thing if I can't hear it well and you can tell me what it says, that would be good.
Will do. I will play it right now. Let's
see. It makes me angry. I'm angry because of what happened to this little girl over my shoulder. Her name is Amy Deal, and well, this could have probably been prevented. Amy was found dead in a box. And the day after this 10-year-old was found, her aunt said she was living, the aunt she was living with, told a TV station that a game of hide and seek may be the reason Amy climbed inside this plastic storage bin.
She was an awesome hider, let me tell you. You know, there's places that she would squeeze into that I wouldn't think my dog could squeeze into. I spent last night crying most of the night. I don't break down well in front of other people, but when I'm by myself, I can lose it real easy.
Well, that aunt and Amy's grandmother are now charged with child abuse. Amy's cousin and the cousin's husband are charged with first-degree murder because Amy wasn't playing hide and seek. Police say she was forced into that box, a padlock placed on it, they believe, because she took a popsicle from the fridge. A popsicle. Investigators describe Amy as a child who suffered through a lot of unusual punishments, forced to sleep on the shower floor after bedwetting, forced to eat hot sauce for lying. There were even punishments reportedly involving dog feces. After Amy's death, some neighbors say they knew it wasn't an accident.
We knew right away it wasn't when it was on, because the way they used to punish the little girl, make her walk up and down the street barefooted and stuff. Oh yeah, they used to do a lot of stuff to her.
So 4 adults will face charges related to Amy's abuse after she died. And when something bad happens to a child and the adults in her life are held responsible, it should make all of us mad. But also it should make us a little bit introspective. Do you act? Think about this. Do you act when you see something amiss at your neighbor's house, your playground, your grocery store parking lot? Or do you simply dismiss it, saying, none of my business? Your answer could make the difference in the life of a child.
I believe that is the end of the clip, Dr. Welsing. Justice, did you have a question that you wanted to ask about that?
Yes. My question was, just by listening to what the people are saying, what are your thoughts about this video, and how does it relate to racism, white supremacy?
Let me ask this question. Was this a black situation that was reported in the video?
No. It was all white people. It was a white situation.
Well, racism, white supremacy is not a system of justice, and there are tragically many pathologies that take place within that system construct. And so there are pathologies that take place amongst people who classify themselves as white, and there are pathologies that take place amongst people who are classified as non-white. But one thing I will say, the system of racism, white supremacy, is a system of necessary murder. In other words, for the system of 1/10 of the people on the planet to maintain control of the 9/10, there has to be sanctioned necessary murder. For example, we have wars going on and people are being killed, and we have wars going on and more money is spent on killing people than on making certain that all the children have high-level education. more money is being spent killing and making weapons than making sure that people have health care. So even though the system is not talked about as a system of necessary murder, it's just like turning on the television. And most of the programs that you see are about murder and destruction and murder and destruction and the devaluing of human life. Now, people give lip service to a concern about human life, but the activity that is actually taking place is the endorsement of killing and the endorsement of murder. And so if the dynamic, the external power dynamic, is about killing and devaluing human life, then we will see it showing up in tragic situations such as you recorded in the video of a family being abusive and destructive to a child. We had a case that was all over the media, the Casey Anthony and Kaylee Anthony case of a mother killing a child. So that, and then unfortunately, when children bully or children kill, we had cases where children have been killing their parents. And so then people will say, well, this is terrible that this child killed the parents. But the examples that are on television that are being put in front of children, videos that are all types of killing and weapons and destruction, the culture is actually teaching children to devalue human life. The culture is teaching people to devalue human life. And as long as the culture hides behind what it is really all about, a culture of necessary murder and a culture of racism, white supremacy, has to kill large numbers of people. It has to have millions of people on the continent of Africa dying of starvation and then showing you little black children in a state of absolute starvation and devastation on the television. And oh my goodness, it's not enough money to make certain that they have food and water. So this is the total context in which that one tragic situation takes place. But there are thousands of those tragic situations taking place in this area of the world and all over the world.
Why do non-white children focus more on animals instead of trying to establish justice and guaranteeing no person is mistreated?
Why do non-white children do what?
Why do non-white children focus more on animals instead of trying?
Are you saying animals?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well.
Or maybe the host can repeat the question. So.
I think her question was, why do non-white children focus on animals instead of attempting to establish justice and guaranteeing that no person is mistreated?
Well, maybe the caller can give me an example of children focusing on animals.
Instead of trying to replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible, they focus more on animals, such as like rats, hamsters, dogs, cats. They take more care of the animals instead of trying to focus on guaranteeing no person is mistreated and trying to replace a system of justice. Trying to replace white supremacy with justice.
Well, In Western civilization, there's the expression, man's best friend is the dog. And so there are many instances where it's being shown on television. I mean, people are making certain that their animals get the right proteins and vegetables, etc., and at the same time they're human beings who are starving on the planet. But the culture itself focuses more, it's not just children, it's adults kissing animals and focusing more on animals than focusing on the welfare of people. So children who focus in this manner are simply doing what they see the adults in the culture doing. And it's not just black children, it's white children as well.
How should an individual...
The next caller, please.
Let's see. Someone called in from the chat room, and they had a question. Their question is, could you please ask Dr. Welsing how to deal with feeling worthless or, I guess, low self-esteem because of the abuse of racism, white supremacy?
Okay, as I said, the most important thing, the step that we have to take as black people is the understanding that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and this system actually teaches the devaluation of black. I'm certain everybody has learned if you're black, get back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. And the system systematically teaches, if you were to probably turn on your television set right now, one of the things that you will see is white images, white from morning until night, 24 hours a day, white. And then if you see a black image, chances are, if it's a male image, the man is kind of looking silly and bucking his eyes and or clowning in one form or another. And so the media, any magazine that you pick up, for the most part, if you stand in the supermarket and you're looking at magazines that are facing everybody who exits a supermarket, you might see a black man looking like a gruesome, some kind of monster with tattoos all over and jewelry hanging and earrings and looking menacing. And so the media, first of all, this is a theme within the culture itself, that black people are dumb, stupid, and bad. And then the images that follow that we see in the media carry out this image. And if we are aware that this is being taught, then in your thinking you can counter the image. If you're not aware that this is deliberately being taught in a system of racism, white supremacy, you simply internalize that image. But I maintain also that people need to be consciously aware. Again, don't waste any time hating or being discourteous or disrespectful to white people. It's like learning how to look in the mirror and saying, I'm going to love myself, I'm going to value myself, I'm going to respect myself, I'm going to love and value other people who look like me, who are black people. And Neely Fuller, in his work, Textbook for Victims of Racism, listed a list of 10 behaviors that would counter racism that black people should stop. I mean, everybody should have a copy of his book and read all of the things that he has had to say about behaviors for countering racism. But his 10 stops are critically important. And I have called these 10 stops exercises in black self-respect and black mental health. And they are stop name-calling one another, stop gossiping about one another, stop cursing one another, Stop being discourteous and disrespectful to one another. Stop squabbling with one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop fighting one another. And stop killing one another. Can you imagine? I hope I said stop gossiping about one another and stop snitching on one another for reasons of personal gain. That these are very, they seem very simple and very basic. But as I said, from the vantage point of a psychiatrist, they are exercises in self-respect and exercises in black mental health, because there's no such thing as mental health without self-respect. And so just thinking about these behaviors, you don't try to impose the behaviors on one another, but just looking at that list of behaviors and deciding which ones you as an individual might decide to practice. And I've added some behaviors onto that list, and I say stop using and selling drugs to one another. Stop making black children think that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. I maintain that black people need to be 30 years old before they get married and before they start having children, and no more than 2 and no closer together than 3 years apart, under these conditions of warfare, of racism, white supremacy being waged against black people, and black people using the first 30 years of their lives getting an education and learning skills and learning how to self-support. Because let's say a male person who has not finished school, does not work, is not going to be able to play the role of a husband or play the role of a father. He may want to, but he's not yet ready. And a female who hasn't finished school is not yet ready to procreate and to take care of a child for 25 years. I add to that, stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. And stop allowing racism, white supremacy to cause division between black, brown, red, and yellow people. So the gentleman who called and asked a question about what behaviors or how can one increase one's level of self-esteem, I would suggest the practicing of one or more of those behaviors, thinking about it, and sharing those ideas with other people.
The people who dialed in on TalkShoe, if you have questions, it's *8. If you're on the free
sorry. Say that louder, please.
The people who, if they have questions, if you can press *8 and I can get your line. The person, Mr. Asar, you dialed in, you had a hand up. If you have a question for Dr. Welsing, your line is open.
Yes, it's a pleasure, Dr. Welsing. I guess my question would be, you promote education very hard, but part of the problem that I'm seeing is that people are Europeanized while they're getting their education, and when that happens, they can't really get out of the thought pattern of trying to work with other black people, creating their own businesses. It's not a criticism. I'm not trying to criticize, but what is our fear of creating our own businesses? That's basically working with one another, because I see people from Iraq. I live in Scandinavia, and they don't have any education, but they're able to open their own businesses. And it just seems like a big problem with us, other than people opening up barbershops.
All right, well, I would say that people in other parts of the world, one might even look at Hispanic peoples who were not directly enslaved like black people were in this area of the world for 300 or 400 years. So when people are enslaved, in other words, slavery was a phase of the system of racism, white supremacy. And as I have spoken about, the system is continuous even to the present. When other people go to a bank to get a loan, they don't have the same experience as black people attempting to get loans to start businesses, so that the attack on black people, the blocking of black people, getting an education, attempting to advance themselves economically, people are not running into the same areas, into the same obstacles that black people are running into. And so this has to be taken into consideration. But as I said, you said people being Europeanized in their education, yes, meaning they're being taught white supremacy think when they go to school. But this is why it's imperative for black people to understand, wait a minute, we're not in a system of democracy, and this is a system of education. Under a democracy, we are in a system of racism, white supremacy. And so white supremacy is being taught in the educational institutions. It doesn't mean don't go there. For example, as a psychiatrist, in my training program, 1963 to 1966 in general psychiatry, I was taught that black people did not have the intellectual potential to benefit from psychotherapy, that the best treatment for black people was medication. Well, I come from a family situation where my father and my grandfather were physicians. And so based on what my family had taught me, I did not accept that. And so I was determined, doing whatever reading I could come across to do, that I was going to try to understand what was making black people ill and to become an effective psychiatrist for black people, even though that was not what I was taught. And so it's not a simple process you have to learn what is being taught, you have to pass the exams that are given to you, but if that is not relevant to your existence, you get those credentials by passing those exams, and then you don't have time to party all the time because you are reading and studying and doing the learning that you need to do based on what you intend to see happen in your life and what you intend to see happen with your people. But the start point is to understand what is actually happening. It's like if you go on a football field, you need to understand the game of football, and that a tennis racket is not going to help you. You have to understand what exactly is going on, and we have been deprived of this understanding. But if we read some of our scholars, for example, if you read Dr. Du Bois, he said in 1903, that's 108 years ago, the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and the darker races of mankind. So reading what the scholars have said, but also understanding, like I say, the most important thing that's going to happen with black people in the 21st century is the understanding that we are dealing with a local, national, global system of racism, white supremacy, so that you understand that, and then everything that you read and encounter, you're putting within that frame of understanding so you know how to interpret exactly what is being said. It may not be what your instructor is saying, but you don't stand up and curse your instructor out. If the instructor is open for a discussion, you can have a discussion. If the instructors are open for a discussion, you learn what the instructor wants you to learn, give it back to him or her. But what do you need to learn as a self-respecting black person? What do you need to try to master, even though you may not have had a grandfather in business or uncle in business or father in business. Well, if you don't have that kind of background, you start from scratch and you're willing to put in the work to learn how to do what you need to learn how to do by taking yourself seriously and understanding the system of racism said, now black people, the roles that I have for you, you can play ball, you can dance and sing. Now, anything that's outside of that, I'm not going to promote. I want to be able to laugh at you. I want to be able to be entertained by you. Now, but I'm not promoting you being an engineer. I'm not promoting you being serious about yourself. Now, black people we have to decide, first of all, putting that message in the frame of a system of racism, white supremacy. So I understand why you want me to limit my activity to this, but I'm determined to do this. And so this is what we have to do. And decide that we value ourselves highly enough so no matter how much work we have to put into becoming who it is that we are determined to be on this planet, nothing is too hard. Or there's no such thing, well, that's too hard, or that's too much work, or I have to be in school too long and I don't want to do it. See, we have to think about the fact that we have black young people who, if they see a classmate black trying to read and study, there's young people saying you're trying to be white. That means that some way, somehow, it has been inculcated in the minds of a number of younger black people that black people are supposed to be stupid. Now, the system of racism, white supremacy, needs the victims to be stupid. But this is why it's important for us to understand the system. Don't waste any time hating, being discourteous, disrespectful to white people. Understand the dilemma that they found themselves in on the planet and tragically what they decided to do about it. Now, what are we going to do about it? We're going to understand the system. We're going to start valuing and respecting ourselves, and then we are going to put in whatever amount of work needs to be put in to maximally develop the black genetic and constitutional potential and understand the creator of the universe, whatever that force is, made black people the parent people of all of the people on the planet. The black people were the first people to understand family life, the first people to have a concept of God, the first people to be scientists, mathematicians, philosophers, architects, astronomers. So we have to understand we were the first people. We produced all of the people on the planet, including white people who are mutations to albinism from black people. So the force in the universe that created this universe determined that black people are going to be the parent people on the planet. All of the people who have been exponents of what God is all about, whether it's Martin Luther King, the Buddha, Gandhi, all the spiritual people have been skin-melanated people. So we have to reflect on that and decide, well, wait a minute, no matter how hard we have to work, we are going to do the work that we're supposed to do to put us in the place that we are supposed to be in on this planet. And we're going to lift ourselves from being the most demeaned and degraded people on this planet to the people who are going to be the people who are going to bring justice and peace to the planet.
Context of white supremacy. The folks on the talk shoe line, star 8, if you have a question for Dr. Welsing. I wanted to definitely make sure that I got in Planet of the Apes, long-running film series where white people no longer are dominating, apes have taken over. The latest installment in this film series is going to be coming out this Thursday.
Planet of the Apes, I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go
It
ahead.
The newest film in this mythology is coming out this Friday, and I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts. I think this film has a lot of significance for racist man and racist woman. It's kind of communicating some of the racist code, and I just wanted to see if you had any thoughts.
Okay, I don't know about the film, so you have to
Oh
tell me
wow,
about it.
wow! It I guess there are about 7 or 8 of them by now, and
I mean, I
they
know about the series Planet of the Apes, but you say the latest one.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it either. It's coming out this Friday, but I think the newest one is supposed to be, it's kind of a retelling of when the apes take over. Like it's showing when I think they have scientists, white scientists, and they have the apes in cages, and they do something to make the apes smarter. And the apes get smarter, they break out of the cages, and they take over and end up killing the white people. That's what happens in the new one. But it's just, I think it's just a
Is
continuation
that
on
the
this.
most recent one?
Yes, ma'am. This is the newest one. This is coming out. It's
Well,
not
see,
even
I
out.
say that's fascinating because I would say the apes are, the symbols of black people. And so in the fantasy thinking, I mean, it's playing out the white fears of, non-white people taking over, but the non-white people are presented in the forms of apes and taking over and killing white people. So this again is, if that's, the core storyline, that is playing up exactly what I'm saying, what racism, white supremacy is. It's the fear of white genetic annihilation. And so these films are, it's just like when the conservatives start ranting and raving and talking about President Obama is a Muslim and he's not a Christian and he wasn't an American and he wasn't born. All of that is code symbolic language saying he's not white. And people whose brain computers are dialed to white genetic annihilation, they pick up what that code message is about. And so also coded into the key film series is the fundamental concern, whether it's conscious or subconscious on the part of the filmmaker. Just like I say, the Harry Potter series is telling young white people, well, you may not be the stars in basketball and football, and you may not be the sports star, but you still are genius young people. And so that series is promoted and promoted and promoted, and every white child is encouraged to buy, see how smart you are, and you have magical powers. And there are no black children in the picture at all. So this is carrying a message of racism, white supremacy. And this is what the culture is about, and this is what the culture teaches. And so we need to relax and understand, oh, this is what the system is about. Well, now, this is our response from the black side of the chessboard to that pattern of thinking. So we're moving beyond just protest. We're moving to analysis, understanding, and what do we need to do with our behavior in order to replace the system of racism, white supremacy, with a system of justice so there can be peace on planet Earth, and as Neely Fuller has posited, move in the direction of becoming universal man and universal woman. And justice, according to Neely Fuller, and I think it is a profound definition, is a system where no one is mistreated, no one is allowed to be mistreated, and those persons who are in need of the most help receive the most help. Now that's a planet dynamic where there can be peace.
Wow. Also wanted to get in, or let me check. Person that dialed in, last 4 digits, 3771, 3771. Did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, may I be heard?
Yes, sir.
My name is Jael. Greetings, Gus. Greetings, Justice, and greetings, Dr. Welsing.
I can't hear it all, so you're going to have to repeat it.
Greetings, Dr. Welsing. Can you hear me now?
Your greetings.
First off, thank you for your work attempting to counter racism. White supremacy has been very beneficial to my growth and development. I do have a question. I came across an article yesterday where an admitted racist white supremacist is a principal of a school in the Bronx, New York, called Our Lady of Mount Carmel. This man is also linked to a white supremacist magazine called the American Renaissance. The person who hired him is a man named Reverend Eric Rapagellia, I think. Well, he says that this admitted racist white supremacist principal, his thoughts and opinions will be very beneficial to the non-white, black, and Latino students in the school. I wanted to know your thoughts and opinions on this and racist white supremacists teaching our children, if possible.
Host, could you please repeat the question?
He said that he just saw a news article where a white man, who I believe an admitted racist white supremacist, is teaching students at a school in Ohio. And he's been linked with Racist White Supremacist magazine. And the caller wanted to get your thoughts on this admitted racist teaching non-white children and saying that, it would be good for them to get his message.
Well, I think that would be an issue for the parents of those children to speak to. Now, if the person was teaching from a black perspective what racism, white supremacy is, and then teaching from the vantage point of a person who classifies himself as white, what that person is saying racism is, that would be one thing. But if the person is just giving a standard white supremacy talk, and that would be demeaning and degrading the images of black people, then any black people that are in that community and who are not responding to that, they are failing to shoulder their responsibility. That's what I would say. In other words, we can teach that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and what that system is from the black person's vantage point. But for a person who is classifying themselves as white and just talking about white supremacy and that blacks are genetically inferior, and if black children are being subjected to that message, then there's a problem. If black people, know about that, and if they don't have any other recourse than to notify the Urban League or to notify the NAACP or to get in touch with Reverend Al Sharpton's network to do something. But I don't know, I don't know the details of what that situation is. But again, I certainly think that the people who are non-white, the black people in that area, they need to sit down and examine and see what that is really all about.
The person who called in, Guest 38, if you had a question for Dr. Welsing, your line should be open. Okay. Looks like that line dropped out. Person that called in from California, did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Sir?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Greetings, Dr. Welsing.
Greetings.
I just want to thank you for writing the ISIS papers. I remember being in high school, sitting on my roof with a friend, and I was telling them about, what I learned from reading the ISIS papers, and it was I'll never forget that. I mean, he never thought about the fact that white people are a small minority, and yeah, it changed his life, and that book definitely changed my life. My question, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
My question is, there are a lot of different theories on, why white people, behave the way that they do. And the newest thing, I guess, that came up is that they're part Neanderthal, that white people have this Neanderthal gene. And I'm hearing black people propagate that idea. What do you think about that? What do you think about that theory, and what do you think about black people saying, well, white people are Neanderthals?
Well, I would first raise the question, when people are saying that, what do they mean by Neanderthals? And one thing about science, science always says what is the simplest, most straightforward explanation. And since we know in science, in medicine, and genetics that there are mutations to albinism, meaning a black person can produce a white-skinned offspring that has white skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so we don't have to posit that people are Neanderthals. The paleontologists and anthropologists are basically all in agreement now that human life began on the continent of Africa. The first human beings were black. And black people are the only people on the planet that can produce all of the colors. Like if you have crystal black, that's highest level black, and that black has a mutation to albinism, meaning the offspring is white-skinned. You mix the white skin with the black, and you get all of the colors of the human family. So we don't have to stretch way out and start talking about black people are Neanderthals, white people are Neanderthals. If that came from people who classify themselves as white, they would, try to posit two cradles of the development of human beings so they don't have to think about themselves after having structured a system that states that white people are genetically superior to black people. And so then now to have to recognize the fact that white people are genetic mutations from black people, instead of, saying, well, gee, we're not genetically superior. We are mutants. We are genetic mutations to albinism from black people. It might be easier for some white people to reach out and say, well, wait a minute, we're not mutations to albinism. We came from Neanderthals, and let's think about two cradles of evolution of human beings, and, some Neanderthals in the north, and that's where people who classify themselves as white descended from. So you can see I don't buy into that discussion, because black people on the continent of Africa are producing albino mutants to this day.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. I really want to thank you for that answer, because I agree 100%. That's not something that black people need to be, engaging in. Can I ask one more quick question?
Sure.
We had this this doctor on the cows, and he was saying that blacks are inferior, and they have no word for justice, and they have no history and capability of thinking abstractly as it refers to mathematics and whatnot. And all of those things, of course, are just lies. As I was listening to him, I was thinking, this person is totally insane. I mean, everything he said to me, just even though I know that he's a racist. So my question is, insanity and racism. To me, he just sounded insane. I was just wondering, I know you said not to call him insane. just maybe speak on that a little bit more?
Well, see, I would see it's preferable to not name call people and to not say the person is insane. In other words, all my discussion this evening has been about people who classify themselves as white after they came out of Europe in the 15th century, circumnavigated the planet, and found out that they were a tiny minority on the planet. And by the time those men had sexual relations with the non-white women, and all the children end up looking like their mothers because of non-white genetic dominance. And so then they set up a system of white supremacy. And my definition of racism, white supremacy, is patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response. So because of the minority status and the genetic recessive status of people who classify themselves as white. So he's just engaging in white supremacy think or white fear of genetic annihilation think. And so that's what he is engaging in. And I want black people to become familiar with. See, black people for so long have been wanting white people to love them and accept them. The whole religious construct under white supremacy has told black people that Jesus is a white man and his father therefore has to be a white man, that God is white. And you want God to love you. You want white to love you. You don't need to love yourself because black is evil and black is the devil. So you want white to love you. And so this is deep within the subconscious thinking of black people. So when a person comes up with white supremacy think, then black people want to faint and fall out on the floor, as opposed to what my recommendation is that we understand the necessary logic of racism, white supremacy, the necessary logic of people who find out we're the only people on the planet who don't have color in our skin, and this is why we want a suntan, and this is why we think we look so pale and we've got to put orange suntan lotion on ourselves. And so then when that person starts talking about black is ugly, black is genetically inferior, that instead of black people getting upset, black people just, it's like if you're playing chess and the person on the white side of the chessboard moves their pieces in a certain way, you don't fall out on the chair playing the black side of the chessboard. You anticipate that that's the move from the white side of the chessboard. It's just like in football. When the opposing team makes an offensive maneuver, the team on the other side of the field doesn't fall out and say, why are you doing that? They understand, they anticipate, they expect that the opposing team is going to have their offense and defense. And so this is the way we need to begin to think about the system of racism, white supremacy. And so that's just, racism, white supremacy speech. You see, to do that kind of talking, but at the same time helping black people understand, because black people at this point in time have certainly been taught to think of themselves as ugly. The more color they have, the uglier they are. This is what black people think, and this is why black people we have to begin to understand, well, this is fascinating how we have been programmed to think that black is ugly, to think that we need long, straight blonde hair hanging down our backs to be beautiful, or, oh, I need to bleach my skin. See, non-white people all over the world, in Asia and Africa, want to bleach their skin and make themselves look like white people because white supremacy think has been indoctrinated all over the world. And as a matter of fact, this is why the system is able to stay in power, because you've got 1/10 of the people in the world holding down 9/10, because the 1/10 have been able to teach and program a significant number of the 9/10 to hate themselves and want to be white. So those people who have been so programmed help hold up the system of racism, white supremacy. But I want us to be able to sit back and be calm and understand and anticipate, because we do understand what this tiny minority of people on the planet, how they have programmed their own behavior and how they have programmed blacks and other non-whites who make up the non-white global majority to think, to demean themselves. And so if people who, when you turn on the television in the morning and you see white, that's, a person is being programmed that white is superior. White are the only people that can talk. White are the only people who can analyze the news. White are the only people who can look intelligent. And then you see a black man bucking his eyes and overweight. So white supremacy is being, and then for people walking around with a little television in their hand and 12 inches from their eyes, they are being, so a man was walking almost into a door in front of me. He's holding up this little screen in front of his face, and so he doesn't even know what's going on in the world. So that's like 24/7 intensive programming for white supremacy thing. Well, so we have to just understand this is being taught, and to understand why it's being taught. You don't have to, burn up in a fuse. Just understand, well, of course, this is what the tiny minority of white people on the planet have to think. But we're going to understand why they have to think, and then how are we going to think. Because just by non-white people, just by black people deciding, wait a minute, I'm going to start respecting myself. I'm going to start valuing myself and valuing other people who look like me. I'm going to stop name-calling myself and other black people. I'm going to stop cursing other black people. I'm going to stop gossiping about other black people, snitching on other black people for reasons of personal gain. Stop squabbling with other black people. Then a whole different kind of dynamic begins to take place amongst black people. People who classify themselves as white work very hard for the last 500 years to put together a system for their survival. They are not going to teach black people how to respect themselves and how to respect one another and how to, when they are ready to procreate, so that they will have strong families and strong children. The people who classify themselves as white, if they're worried about their genetic annihilation, they're not going to teach black people how to be strong and self-respecting. This is something that black people have to decide, that now that we have decoded racism, white supremacy, this is the work that we are going to do for ourselves. This is what we are supposed to be engaged in on the planet. We are not supposed to be the trashiest people on the planet, and that's who we are right now. The trashiest people on the planet. The only people on the planet who are calling themselves niggers and dogs and gangsters and thugs and bitches and hoes. So we have to say, this is fascinating how we have been programmed to self-destruct. Now, we have other plans for ourselves. The creator of the universe didn't put us on the planet to be the mothers and fathers of everybody and then to self-destruct. We have another role to play, and we're going to see that we play it. And nothing is going to be too much effort or too hard or too much self-discipline for us to engage in. We owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the unending number of generations that we intend to see come from us. We are on a genocide slide. We understand why the system of racism, white supremacy has put us on a genocide slide. Now, we don't intend to be on a genocide slide. And none of it is going to be about having to hate anybody else. It's going to be about what we are going to do with ourself and recognizing the power of self-respect. Self-respect is more powerful than nuclear weapons.
The person who called in with a question from Georgia, caller in Georgia, did you have a question for Dr. Welsing? Caller in.
Yes, can I be heard, Gus?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings to you, Gus, and the listeners and the callers out here. And Dr. Welsing, it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
My pleasure to hear you. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me, Dr. Welsing?
Yes, go right ahead. Speak as loud as possible, please.
Okay, I do apologize. I'm on my headset, so I'm going to try and be as loud as I can. You were saying earlier in the conversation that we should strive at all times to get married when we are in our 30s and to space our children at least 2 to 3 years apart. Unfortunately, that's a bit late for me because I got married in my 20s and my kids, they are quite old. They're not to that stage. Do you have a recommended number, because there are numbers coming out and telling people what number of children to have? I came from a very large family. Do you think that there should be a limit as to the number of children to produce in that marital relationship?
Well, we are, the system of racism, white supremacy, is very stressful conditions on the people who are being victimized by that system. And so, if somebody can say, I come from a family of 15 children, and all of these 15 are people who have gone to college, no one is on drugs, no one has gone to prison, then that's outstanding. That's an exception to the rule. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm trying to talk about the maximal development of 2 under the stressful conditions of the war of racism, white supremacy. And it's better to bring 2 and maximally develop those 2 than to have 10 and 8 out of the 10 are on drugs or in prison. You see, like if we look at the black prison population, 90+%, well, first of all, the current census tells us that 72% of black families are single-parent, female-headed households, where black male children don't have a father guide. And it's not because black men are bad, it's because of the stress, the deliberate stress of the system of racism, white supremacy. And so if black men have a problem with employment, so that it's hard for a man to have a job, maintain a job. So if he has 2 children to think about taking care of instead of 15, and he can't take care of 1, and so he flees the situation. See, we are under the conditions of war and stress. It's just like healthcare disparities. Black people have more hypertension, more kidney disease, more stroke than any other group of people. It's not because our genetics are impaired. It's because we are under 24/7 stress from the system of racism, white supremacy. So we have to begin to understand what context are we functioning in. If one in 1990, for every black male who got a college degree, for every 1 black male who got a college degree, 99 black males were in prison. And the majority of those who were in prison grew up in households where there was no father present. So this is what we have to look at. So somebody might say, oh, it's wonderful to have 100 children. See, even Ethel Kennedy, multimillionaire, Robert Kennedy's wife, Senator Robert Kennedy, he and his wife, they were multimillionaires. They had 11 children. Well, it's no space on a lap for 11 children. And so some of those children tragically ended up with problems with alcohol and drugs. In other words, instead, a psychiatrist doesn't look at behavior and say this is bad. The psychiatrist looks at behavior and says, what is the cause of this behavior? And so I'm looking at, as a general psychiatrist and child psychiatrist, when children don't get their early emotional needs met, they become vulnerable to drug addiction, alcoholism, sex obsession, and victims of sexually transmitted diseases, and some of which cannot be cured. So that's what I'm looking at. So I think that you would agree that it would be better for two people who are struggling to maintain their family and their household without becoming overwhelmed to have two children at an age. See, instead of somebody having a baby at 17 years of age and then at 22 deciding, I think I'm going to go back to school. And so they've got a 5-year-old child, and so they're busy working and going to school and no time and attention to give to the child. And so then that child ends up having sex at an early age and becoming a teenage parent. So understanding these dynamics, because I'm not looking at it as good and bad people, I'm just looking at what are the emotional dynamics that happen under certain circumstances. So I'm trying to prevent that and at the same time put people in optimal positions to get employment, maintain employment, take care of themselves, take care of a family, and raise two children who can be functional, self-respecting black people who will help bring this system of racism, white supremacy, and justice to an end. I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
I think so. The person, Guest 38, did you have a question for Dr. Welsing? I saw your hand up. Guest 38, did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, I did. Good evening, Gus, Dr. Welsing, callers and listeners. I guess my question was, I've read that people who suffer from Stockholm Syndrome, they develop a type of endearment and a type of sympathy for their captors. Mm-hmm. And to my understanding, that is what we as black people suffer from, a sort of the same type of syndrome. How are, I guess, the victims of Stockholm Syndrome treated to come up out of that mental state? And how could that be applied to, I guess, liberating the psychological enslavement of black people?
Well, again, I think, understanding is very, very important. Gaining understanding. And, we as black people, we greet each other by saying, hey, what's happening? What's happening? And I say this is because we have not understood what is going on. And what is going on is a system of racism, white supremacy. And like the Stockholm Syndrome, where people who are imprisoned and then they start identifying with the person who imprisons them because that person has power over their very existence. And the hope that that person, it's like you're in a jail cell, so to speak, and you can be either treated with kindness or you can be treated abusively by your the prison guard or the prison warden. And so the continuing abuse makes you start wishing that I hope maybe today the guard is going to come in and not spit in my food. Or I hope today the guard won't kick me or beat me. And so then I develop an identification with the captor. And so black people, in a sense, have developed that, yes. We don't need to apologize for it. This is a human reaction. And in addition to that, we have been given the concept, the religious concept, that this white Jesus, God figure, and if Jesus, the Son, is white, the Father has to be white. And so I'm the slave master. I'm beating the slave, and then I tell the slave that they can go to church on Sunday, and here's a picture of Jesus, and Jesus loves you, and you may be beaten down here, but you're going to get reward when you go to meet Jesus in heaven. So slave, obey your master. Turn the other cheek, and you'll get your reward in heaven. And so, yes, people who are being beaten 24/7 for hundreds of years begin to identify with and put greater value on people who classify themselves as white than people who look like the victim self, who is being beaten and mistreated and who is being deprived of access to the good things in life. I just looked at a study that was done the other day where this is a current study that was done indicating that darker complected black women are given more harsh sentences than light-skinned black women. Now, somebody might think, really? Is this happening today? Yes, it's happening today, and that was found out for, black females. But the color code for white genetic survival is if you're black, you're black, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow, white, right. So people who have the skin coloration because of rape by slave masters of the grandparents and the great-grandmothers, do you see? And therefore, because their skin color is lighter and they are not perceived by the white supremacy mindset as major a threat to white genetic survival. It's just like Hispanics, because they are lighter hue for the most part than black people. They are not perceived as much of a threat, although they are non-white and they're perceived as a threat, but not as great a threat as people who have high-level melanin skin pigmentation in the white supremacy mindset and therefore in the white supremacy system and culture. So again, we have to understand why these things happen and not condemn ourselves, but say, this is fascinating. I'm glad that I'm now beginning to understand the dynamics within the power construct and the power system of racism, white supremacy. And so this is why I'm understanding and thinking about what I must do as an individual, how I must discipline myself, how I can no longer just play with sex. See, sex is wonderful, but under the conditions of war, people have to discipline their sexual activity, especially if sexually transmitted diseases have been put out here, just like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. HIV is out here, it's not supposed to have a cure, and people can just transmit that one person to another, and then you have large numbers of people who are dying from sexually transmitted diseases because they are not behaving in a self-caring, self-respecting manner in terms of their sexual activity. Or they might have sexual obsession because they didn't get their emotional needs met when they were children, which is why I recommend that parents need to be older. They no more than 2, no closer together than 3 years apart. They need to be married, and they need to be committed to taking care of a child for 25 years. That's what it takes to stand people on their feet under the conditions of war, of racism, white supremacy.
Wow. I wanted to get in one last question. There was a recent news report where a black female, she was being terrorized on her website, which promoted natural hair care products for black females. And I know a gentleman, he runs Victim. He operates racismdaily.com, which is a website that just compiles news articles of racism, white supremacy, different news incidents, current events. And he too said he was being terrorized. White people were leaving all sorts of ugly messages and calling him racist. And our site as well, being terrorized. Different racists have been coming from a website. I'll leave the name out. But, and, you know, just the same typical trifling, tacky, racist conduct, nigger and nigger jokes, that sort of thing. What do you think that indicates when white people, they have to spend their time and energy to harass other black people who are attempting to work against racism?
Well, I think I've said it 100 times, but I'll say it 101 times. They're just engaging in racism, white supremacy behavior for white genetic survival. It's because they feel like they are a tiny minority that is genetically vulnerable, and so they have to attack and demean and degrade people who are black and otherwise non-white. And if the black people would, you know, the person who receives such a message would say, well, I do understand that you are expressing your fear of white genetic annihilation. Period. Not you call me nigger and I'm upset. You see, because then the person who classifies him or herself as white says, well, you people call yourselves niggers. We taught you to call yourselves niggers. Now you call yourselves nigger. And so you're complimenting me and how successful I've been in programming you under my system of racism, white supremacy. See, I say everything begins with, do we understand what the system of racism, white supremacy is? It's a tiny, vulnerable population that feels itself to be vulnerable. Yes, they have armed themselves with all the weapons on the planet so that they can kill as many non-white people as necessary. But it just takes the non-white people, the global majority, to wake up and begin to understand and decide that they are going to teach themselves to respect themselves as non-white people. You see, but if I'm bleaching my skin and having to have straight hair as opposed to helix hair, then I am reinforcing that I'm ugly and white is beautiful. So, you know, we have to be very gentle with ourselves, and we really have to deeply understand the system of racism, white supremacy, and this is what has been programming our minds for the last 500 years. And it's all over this area of the world, all over the continent of Africa, all over Central America, all over South America, where people are into color sickness, hair sickness, and feature sickness, upholding the system of racism, white supremacy. And we have to, with respect for ourselves, begin to break through this oppressive system, begin to understand exactly what it is. And yes, it will teach black people to name-call and disrespect themselves, to have the most despicable images in the media, teach black men to put on dresses. You're not really men. Let your pants hang down. Step out of your pants so you can put on a dress because I have psychologically annihilated your masculinity. which is necessary for me to maintain white supremacy and white genetic survival on the planet. For us to begin to understand all of that and say, wow, we are finally understanding what the system is about. We don't have any time to engage in hate or talking about killing white people. That's not necessary. All we have to do is know how to play black self-respect. And as I said earlier in the show, at this point in time, an aspect of black self-respect is, wait a minute, that black man who is living in the White House, President Barack Obama, first black president of the United States, is being supremely disrespected. And if I respect myself as a black person, I have to say, wait a minute, I can't force the people who classify themselves as white. I wish they would show respect, but so what if I wish it? But I can say, if this disrespect of this black man, who's one of the most intelligent people who has ever been in that office, he's a black man who respects himself, he has a black wife, he has 2 black children, black mother-in-law. He's trying his best to help everybody, and he's being disrespected at a level that a president has never been disrespected in history. And if it continues past today, black people are going to black out Thanksgiving, and they're going to black out Christmas. Wait a minute, as those of us who have had good grandmothers would say, I'm not going to have it. We're simply not going to have this disrespect, because showing him disrespect is showing disrespect to all black people. And those black people who think that they got time to call him names and demean and degrade him as though he's the only person who's forced to cooperate with the system of racism, white supremacy. There's no black person who has a job in any corporation, who has any job in a university or a college, who has a job any place, who is not cooperating with the system of racism, white supremacy. Because if you pay the cashier when you check out of the supermarket, you are cooperating with the system of racism, white supremacy. If you stop at a red light, you are cooperating with the system of racism, white supremacy. And if you understand that system, you know that you are not out of it doing your own thing. And so President Obama is forced. He's had more death threats than anybody in that office in the history of the United States. All kinds of threats: we'll kill you, we'll kill your wife, we'll kill your children if you do this or if you don't do that. And so we need to wake up to reality and decide that respecting ourselves as black people is one of the most important things that we can do in the next 12 months. And we need to show it. And every black person who can drag themselves on crutches if necessary to a polling place, they need to say, wait a minute, I'm responsible for either putting a vote against racism, white supremacy as best as possible. Your vote is not going to change the system, but your vote in a small way can help determine what is going to be the shape of the system that you have to deal with. And so it's all about being responsible, self-respecting. And one of the most important things, as I've said, I don't know President Obama personally. He doesn't know me. But I do understand the system of racism, white supremacy, and how massively it has taught us to demean and to degrade ourselves, and how to demean and degrade one another. And we have to come out of that. and decide, wait a minute, this man is under attack. He's done everything, gone to college, got good grades, gone to law school, top in his class, respecting himself, trying to respect his black wife, and you're going to attack him, politically try to lynch him, and we're going to sit back and look at it? No, we're going to black out Thanksgiving, black out Christmas. You got some money, send it so that those black people on the continent of Africa are not going to starve to death. Meaning, no, that will be the power of black self-respect. I said every black person ought to become a member of the black self-respect political party. It's nothing you sign up to. It's in your mind. It has to do with, do I decide I'm going to respect myself as a black person? I'm going to respect the fact that the force that made this universe made me a skin-melanated black person. And I am going to respect myself and try to help justice be established on this planet so there can be peace. See, we have to have a direction, and we have to have an understanding of what is our purpose on this planet. That's like, what's the purpose of parents? We didn't decide we were going to be the parents of the planet. The creator of the universe, whatever that force is, decided that black people are going to be the parents of all of the people on the planet. And then it's just like child psychiatrists see all the time. Sometimes in a family, the parents are reduced to being run by their children, and the household is in chaos, and so therefore they need to go to the psychiatrist. So the same thing has happened on the planet. Our albino mutant offsprings have taken charge of the planet and are guiding the planet to hell. Nothing but mass murder all over the planet. Money to kill, but no money for health. Money to kill, no money for educating all of the children. See, all those billions of dollars every week that are being spent to kill every child, whether they're black, white, brown, red, or yellow, to have education through college. If those monies were not being spent killing and for war, then people could have WPA jobs, building infrastructure, supporting themselves, supporting their families. All the children are educated. All the people have health care because human life is valued as opposed to human life being degraded. And to the extent that people who classify themselves as white are in charge of the planet, and to the extent that they look in the mirror and say, ooh, I look so pale, I don't like myself, I need a suntan, I need color, I hate myself. So not only will they kill, but they will degrade the act of sex. And they will find themselves saying men can marry men and women can marry women because we demean the act of procreation. But these are not conscious decisions all the time. It comes about because what are the dynamics that are flowing through the system and the culture that are not valuing human beings, not valuing life. It's valuing death and killing and destruction. You know, in promoting, we're going to kill the leader of that country. We're going to kill his children. We're going to kill the leader of this other country. Well, let's kill them. And then we wonder why the children think about killing. So a lot of thinking, we need a lot of wisdom at this critical time on the planet. The people who talk about the changes that are supposed to take place in 2012, they may be onto something because things are sliding. Just turn on the TV and look at what's happening in the Congress, the most powerful nation so-called on the planet. the USA is in a shambles. And all of it being related to, we are going to demean this black man who is president of the United States. If the economy collapses, who cares? We have to destroy him. So there needs to be a counterforce of knowledge, understanding, wisdom, that, wait a minute, we're going to have to turn this aircraft cruiser around in mid-ocean and lend our energies to take things in another direction. And we never can get beyond what level do we respect ourselves as individuals. Can I look in the mirror and see my black self, not with my skin bleached, not with my hair straight? Can I look in the mirror and decide I am going to respect myself as a black person on this planet? If I think I'm spiritual, if I think I'm religious, and I think that God force created me, and then I'm going to look in the mirror and disrespect myself, and I think that something positive is going to come out of that? Not really. So we have a lot of thinking to do, and a lot of, embracing ourselves and deciding that we are going to love and value ourselves and that we have an important role to play on this planet. Somebody said that Gandhi was asked the question, Mahatma Gandhi, the great leader of the subcontinent of India, leading them towards their independence. Somebody asked Gandhi, what is the purpose of the Negro? And Gandhi said the role of the Negro is to bring justice and peace to planet Earth. So I think, our job, we are the parent people of the planet, and parents are always responsible for getting themselves together and getting the household together. The household that we have here is planet Earth. It's in complete disarray, being run by racism, white supremacy, and that can lead to nowhere. It's injustice. It can't lead to peace. And so the parent people, we have a critical role to play. We're going to have to scrape ourselves up off of the floor and out of the trash bin where we have been put by this system. Trash bin, meaning we have been willing to call ourselves niggers and dogs and gangsters and thugs and bitches and hoes. See, this is almost like a gigantic psychological experiment. How can you bring a people to the lowest levels of degradation and make them wallow in it and like it? That's what has happened to us. And so, we've got to pick ourselves up and be glad and willing to do so. Say, wow, this is interesting what has happened. Now let us see what we are going to make of this situation. Let us see whether we can make ourselves into the being that the creator of the universe intended us to be. This is a magnificent universe. And for people to be demeaning and degrading themselves and other people on this planet, the only one that we know about that's inhabited, for this kind of destructive activity, bombing people's houses, children walking around not being fed, people being injured and wounded and killed. This is despicable. And we need to all look at it and say, we are all going to lend our shoulders to the wheel and bring this to a halt. And we're going to start with focusing on and understanding the importance of self-respect. See, self-respect is not looking in the mirror and I think I'm cute and I think I'm handsome. No, self-respect is deep valuing of the self as human beings, as manifested in how am I relating to other people, beginning with the people who look just like me. Okay, next question.
Wow. There's a person that called in, guest 46. Did you have a quick question for Dr. Welsing?
Hear me? Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. I have a question about the ISIS papers. In the ISIS papers, you speak about the unified field theory, and I just assume that it's kind of the same thing as this asili that Marimba Ani is talking about. That means the cultural seed, that everything in the particular culture that we are living in is working to fulfill one goal. And once you understand what the cultural seed is, or understand what the unified field of the culture is, then you understand everything that has been put in place. Well, it seems that we are living in a system of white supremacy. Well, at least I am sure of that. And everything has been put in place to get this goal of white domination. Since this whole system and all the 9 areas of human activity are geared towards that, how can we break that cycle and come, and understand that our I don't know the words because English is not my native language, but how can we stop this, since everything has been put so carefully in place to achieve this goal, which is already achieved, white domination, through the whole world, even in the country where I'm living.
Let me just say this. To begin with understanding what I've been saying all evening. See, it's one thing to not understand that we are in a system of racism and to think that we are in a system of democracy because that's what we have been taught. See, we've been told we are in a system of democracy and it has some imperfections, and we just keep waiting around for those imperfections to be straightened out, which is quite different way of thinking than to think we are in a system that has a specific goal objective. It's a system of racism, white supremacy, and for that's for white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation. And it necessitates the inferiorization of black and other non-white people, especially black people, because they have the greatest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation. Those are 2 diametrically opposed ways of thinking about reality. And so we have been given a misinterpretation, or we have been deliberately deceived about what the reality, the power structure, what it's all about. And so I have been saying it's not democracy, it's racism, white supremacy. And the purpose of white supremacy is white genetic survival of the global white minority population, which consists of the inferiorization of black and other non-white people. And this is the unified field. I don't know what other people are described. This is what I'm talking about when I say unified field theory. That where you see that all of the behavior dynamics are tied and related together, where economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics, religion, sex, and war, all of the areas of activity are controlled by the ultimate goal objective, which is white genetic survival on this particular planet with these particular demographics. And the understanding of that, if people actually begin to understand, that begins to make a shift because they articulate what they understand. They're not calling white people names cursing white people out, being discourteous and disrespectful. They are simply saying it's like a chessboard where you say, I understand the opponent. For example, I think that President Barack Obama does not really understand racism, white supremacy as I'm talking about it. He has the philosophy of Rodney King. Can't we all just get along? Why can't we cooperate and sit down and work this budget out? But he's sitting on the other side of the table from people who are saying, black man, we want to see you fail. This is racism, white supremacy thing. So we're not talking about the same thing at all. So he gets more and more frustrated because he wants people to cooperate and get along. But when people are, one side of the table is concerned about being a tiny minority, being genetic recessive, and fear of white genetic annihilation, and they're sitting across the table from someone who represents genetic dominance and the ability, the genetic ability to cause white genetic annihilation. Those people are not on the same page and can't get on the same page. And the people in power at this present time are the people who are fearful of their genetic annihilation. So in Oslo, Norway, they walk into a summer camp with black and brown children as well as some white children, and you start killing as many as possible. And then you blow up government buildings that seem to be supporting non-white people coming in to Norway or coming into Europe. So those are two different modes of thinking, and my suggestion is black people begin to empower themselves. Not when they say they hate white people. That's cheap. But when they say to people who classify themselves as white, I think I'm beginning to understand what you are struggling with on this planet and what has been the reason for the behaviors that you have engaged in, certainly for the last 500 plus years. And so now that we understand, we can dialogue with you about what our interest is. Our interest is establishing justice on the planet so there can be peace. And we are willing to shape and mold our behavior to achieve this objective. It would be ideal if you would abandon the idea of white genetic survival by any means necessary, killing, et cetera, but we cannot make you, but we can determine what it is that we are going to be engaged in doing as a majority people on this planet. Now, that's honest dialogue. You see, when people are talking truth to each other, that is a high-level manifestation of respect. It's just like in a male-female relationship. If the people are being truthful with each other, not trying to get over on, deceive one another, but when they are being open and honest and truthful, and it's our responsibility as black people, respecting ourselves and being truthful. No, we are beginning to understand the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is, and exactly how it works, why it exists on this planet. And it can be changed around. This didn't come with the stars. This is something that is man-made on the planet. And so people who are determined that there be justice on the planet and they are willing to behave in a manner that will produce justice on the planet, they can be determined that this is going to change so there can be justice and peace. And maybe we can move towards becoming universal man and universal woman. But this cannot happen as long as racism, white supremacy exists, which necessitates the behavior that the 32-year-old Norwegian was engaged in, killing people and bombing people and destroying human beings on the planet. That's unacceptable.
Context of white supremacy. It is always just a huge honor, privilege to have you on the program, Dr. Welsing. We are super thankful you could share some of your Sunday evening. Learned a ton, and I know listeners, as usual, super appreciative of your time. I always look forward to having you on the program. If there's anything you'd like to say before we wrap up the program, please feel free.
I commend you for continuing to hold a program of this kind where ideas that are not expressed in a number of other outlets can be expressed, and so that your listeners can raise questions that may not get a chance to be raised elsewhere. So I commend you for this responsible use of your time.
For sure. Thank you again for sharing so much of your time with us. We thoroughly appreciate it, and hope that you continue to take care of yourself. Looking forward to more of your work. We need it. Definitely, we need more of your work. We will be in touch, and we'll definitely be keeping up with current events saturated with racism, white supremacy of late. Thank you so much, Dr. Welsing, and we will be in touch with you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Context of white supremacy, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, her 10th visit to the C.O.W.S. Always a pleasure to have her on the program. I believe Mr. Fuller was on Blog Talk today as well. So full day of counter-racist programming. You should be able to download them both. So if you missed a portion, or if you didn't get to hear one, you should be able to download them both and check them out. And the blackout, she was talking about blacking out Thanksgiving and Christmas, the context of white supremacy, end of summer blackout has begun. We will be back on Tuesday. People had been requesting that we get a black male from the area of the world known as Canada on the program. I believe mission has been accomplished. Dr. Ronaldo Walcott, black male, he will be on the program this Tuesday. I found out about him. He's done research on how black immigrants in Canada are being mistreated, no surprise, and how this, of course, racism, white supremacy directed specifically at black people. Definitely want to focus on that. And I think this will pretty much be the first time that we've had a guest. Take that back. Sorry. We have had a guest who is a resident of Canada on the program, but we haven't had too many. And I know we have quite a few listeners in that area. So hopefully this will compensate for not having covered that area enough. But that'll be this Tuesday. Also, I'm pleased to announce that after a year, for people, if you've been listening, if you saw the link for Olivia Ebanks, she's a black female in the area of the world known as the United Kingdom, and she's the author of Almost British. She was supposed to be on the program in October of 2010, kept getting delayed. White people ultimately prohibited her from talking about the book, selling the book. Her book is all about racism, growing up in England, being mistreated on the job, and the counter-racist techniques that she used to deal with the white people practicing racism on her job. But they took her to court. They have prohibited her from speaking about it, promoting the book, selling the book. And why I'm super excited about this program next weekend, I think Pam would really appreciate this. Her black husband has picked up the slack since she can't do anything about the book. He has taken over to talk about the book. He will be on the program attempting to support his attempted wife, black female. Just out, in my opinion, outstanding illustration of what black people should be attempting to do under these conditions. I got the book. She sent me a signed copy like almost a year ago. So I will get to read it. I'll get to share lots of it. It feels great just to be able to work directly against white people who did not want this book discussed. It's titled Almost British. I know some of our listeners even got a copy because they saw that we were going to talk about it. But next weekend, August 7th, he'll be on the program. All black people. For the entire month of August and should be a little bit beyond. All black people, if you have guests that you would like to have on the program during that time, as long as they're black, we will see if we can make it happen. With that, I did want to check because I thought it was important. 909, thank you for the Neanderthal question. That is something I'm not really into all that, just calling white people monkeys and apes, but I do think that's very important because I recognize that a lot of black people are interested in that. Did you have anything you wanted to comment around that question or anything else Dr. Welsing shared? 909?
Yes, thank you for opening my line. I just think her answer was, I didn't know what it was going to be, but if I was going to predict, I would have said that she would have been against that type of conversation. And I'm so glad she said it. And, you know, because people are going to hear this. And, man, I'm just so glad she said it because that's what the new trend topic is this, you know, Neanderthal gene. So I wasn't sure what she was going to say, but and she knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. So I hope people will hear that and put that to rest because it's definitely non-constructive.
Hear, hear. I have a saying. I started saying this years ago when I was watching material on what white people call the missing link. You can do research on that, the missing link. Anytime white people come at you, and especially if they are white people that are trying to act like they're academic and serious about all this, and they're talking about apes, they are trying to make a monkey out of you. That is the conclusion I've come to. I mean, white people get real out of control with their deceitfulness when it comes to monkey business. I mean, they will just make up anything and start telling you. But I mean, that's super important. I haven't really touched on that on the program, but I do recognize a lot of people have been talking about this and posting about this, and a lot of black people. I thought her response was fantastic. I'm glad the question was asked. And I would just say again, anytime white people, and this I think did come from white people. I don't think black people are the ones who ignited this whole discussion and this research. Anytime white people bring up apes and anything dealing with human evolution and all that, they are trying to make a monkey out of you. And I would say specifically black people. That is just, I just have that in the forefront of my mind. I could be wrong. With that, we will be back Tuesday. Dr. Ronaldo Walcott, he's a black male, area of the world known as Canada. We should have lots of programs for the month of August. All black people, really looking forward to combating the anti-blackness. Hopefully we can have Dr. Frank Wilderson on as well. Thank you, everybody who called in and asked questions. Download should be available within 90 minutes. Should be available here at TalkShoe. Thanks so much, and we will be back soon. 2011 Blackout. Looking forward to it. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. C.O.W.S. signing out.